Hey friends, it's Lady Ambrosia. I hope you all are doing well. I'm super excited today because I was able to get a very special guest here on the channel. Some of you may already know her. She's been on YouTube here for a little while. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Mandi See. And yeah, I've been on YouTube for 9 years, primarily talking about Wicca, witchcraft, and paganism.
Yes, and her channel is so bomb. I will have a link in the down bar so that you guys can go follow that. And why don't you kind of talk about some of your experience here being on YouTube for the amount of time that you have and changes that you've seen and what that experience has been like as a witch here on this platform.
When I first started, it was a much smaller community. I think it was probably 1,000, 1,500 people that were kind of in the community, or certainly active in the community. And so everybody kind of already, well, not already knew each other, but got to know each other really, really quickly. And it was much more, not to insult the way that things are today, but it was much more of a close kind of community feel because of the fact that everybody kind of could talk to each other one-on-one because it wasn't such a big community, and everybody was just making low quality videos on their phones and on their webcams and stuff.
Right,
so you know,
right.
It was none of this like studio lighting or professional cameras or anything like that back then. So yeah, and then it changed and it grew a lot bigger, and it grew quickly, and now there's far too many people to ever discover all of them, which is totally different from the beginning. So it's big now.
It is. And what are your thoughts on, I guess, YouTube as, you know, when we think about resources and tools as far as expanding knowledge and growth and, you know, accessing more information, what are kind of your thoughts on how this platform that witches are using and vlogging on and sharing their experiences and sharing their work, you know, how do you think this will affect the witches now coming out of the broom closet and looking at this platform for insight, or even the witches moving forward into the future? I know we talked a little bit, you know, about that before we went live, which, guys, let me say this. It was such a fiasco with YouTube today, so I apologize for us being later than we were supposed to be, but that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. So yeah, what do you think? How do you think this will change kind of the way people evolve, so to speak? What impact do you think it will have on witches moving forward in the future?
I think that I think the internet is fantastic, and I've always said that. I think that it makes it so much easier to connect with people and to learn different things,
right,
from somebody who, and I know it was much easier for me than it was for people, you know, 20 years before me as well. But for me, myself, when I was young, I didn't know anyone who was pagan. I didn't have any way of getting in touch with people who were pagan. And I used to have to go to the library with my mom and get books out of the library, or rely on really dodgy kind of Google searches. In fact, it wasn't even Google back then, to try and find information. So I think it's really good in terms of information because it's just so available to people now. The thing that I think is perhaps not such a positive thing is that because the information is so available now, a lot of people like to hear other people's experiences instead of going out and finding these things out for themselves. And I think it's brilliant to hear about other people's experiences, but I think it's still important to actually live your own spiritual path as well as just watching spiritual people and allowing that to make you feel spiritual, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of, you know, and that's not just YouTube. I think that's with social media in general. Social media makes people feel like they're socializing even though they're not. And I feel like we can kind of fall into a trap on YouTube, and I know because I've done this, where you're watching so many other people and taking in so much from their spiritual journeys or their religious beliefs, that is brilliant. But as a result, you can kind of forget about doing your own work. And I think that that's kind of the downside to it.
Almost kind of like watching like a bunch of cooking shows, but yet not spending any time really making anything in the kitchen is kind of the analogy kind of that you're using with people
I
getting
think that it's
their
important.
sense of fulfillment.
I think it's important to make sure that you can be inspired by people, and I think that's fantastic. But I think it's important to make sure that you're still kind of doing your own stuff and working on you at the same time, because it's really easy not to. When I used to have my business, a lot of the time I would be working with clients all day long. And so I'd feel like I'm spending, 7, 9, however many hours talking about spirituality and talking about self-development and all of these things all day long, that I didn't have the energy to do my own work. But it also felt like I was doing it because I was spending so much time thinking about those things, but it wasn't for me. So I think that you have to make a distinction between other people and your own path.
Definitely. I mean, I would totally agree to that, especially as someone also who, is, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, kind of in the industry of doing work for others, running my own business and doing psychic readings for other people, or looking at their natal charts. And it can be easy sometimes when you are in a business like that to feel like, okay, I have this practice because I'm with my clients and this and that, but it's also so beneficial and crucial and absolutely necessary to remember to make time, not just for your clients, but also for yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think sometimes for people, that is where they take themselves out of the business, because they neglect themselves sometimes. Not saying that's for all cases, but I've seen that before.
And that was exactly what happened to me, was that I was just spending so much time trying to work with as many people as possible because I loved it. But I would realize that actually, I'm getting all these emails saying thank you and people talking about how they're moving forwards, which made me really happy. But I was realizing that I wasn't moving forward. And for me, I felt very kind of hypocritical doing that kind of work with people, but not having time to do my own work. And so that's why I stopped. I intend to go back to it, but I'm still in the transition at the moment of finding a healthy balance of how to do it and not getting myself into kind of a bit of a funk. And I think that is something that is just going to take me time, because obviously something that maybe works for somebody else isn't necessarily going to work for me. So I'm still very much in that transition now of trying to find a balance.
Right. Well, and I've seen that also with, even in my local physical community in terms of new age shops, occult shops, witchy stores, psychic fairs, psychic festivals. The thing about the industry I have noticed is that there does seem to be a high number of turnover. There are a few people, and I'm talking about my local community. I'm not saying this is the case across the board. And I'm talking about in-person physical services and mortar and pestle businesses. Not so much just online, but I've seen a lot of psychic businesses, or even really just occult businesses, pop up and run and be open for a few years and then run themselves into the ground.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I think some of that has to do with kind of what we're talking about, but also I think some of it has to do with the economy here in my local area, the market, the niche of clients they're targeting, and then also just like, I guess, kind of the culture of where we're at. Because where I'm at, surprisingly, I live here in Indy, which is, in the US, here in the Midwest, and this is a very conservative area. Very, very, very conservative, very, very red state, they call it. And however, we actually have one of the largest pagan prides in the States. So I don't know how that happens or how that happened to be. But even though we have this huge pagan pride, we also have tons of businesses that pop up that then in a couple years will go underground.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's really common here too.
Okay.
And I think that a lot of the time it's the places that seem to do the best with these types of businesses are always places that are considered sacred or special or pagan places. So whether it's somewhere that has a henge or some form of like, you know, fountain or stone or some form of structure that people really associate with spirituality. So I think that generally to have that type of business, it is best to try and be at the heart of that kind of space. But obviously those spaces attract tourists. And so to be able to go and run a business and rent a shop or something like that in a place like that is very, very expensive. And you really need to already be doing very, very well before you take the risk to start something new, I think. So I think a lot of people, they might have very lovely products and they may be fantastic at selling them, but when you are in a spiritual place or somewhere that you consider sacred, like Glastonbury or somewhere like that,
Yeah.
or like for you guys, Salem, somewhere like that, you know,
Right.
people expect to go there and spend a lot of money. They know it's a touristy place. They know things are going to be expensive, and so they don't mind. But I think if you're just walking around a normal neighborhood where everything else has, you know, a basic price, and then you go into an occult shop, for lack of, you know, anything else that I can think of for the moment, and things are a little bit more pricey, I think that then kind of it makes you think, oh no, you know, you might spend that money if you were in Salem, you might spend that money if you were in Glastonbury, but anywhere else, it kind of, you're reminded that, oh, perhaps I shouldn't spend $25 on that when I could use it for something else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also think too that a lot of the way some of these shops survive is the fact that really their niche market are the tourists.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's a lot of the shops that I've seen that are catered to the practitioners. Those are the ones I see that go under a lot versus
I
a
think,
lot of the shops I
sorry.
see that are catered to, oh no, you're fine. No, you're totally fine. A lot of the shops I see that, you know, carry witchy items for practitioners, but are kind of more introductory type material
Yeah.
and more like to where any random Jill or Jane off the street could come on in and find stuff they'd like kind of like generic dream
Yeah,
catchers,
like, oh,
generic
this is
spell
cute
candles.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Stuff like where maybe they're about toe deep into astrology and they know they're an Aries, so they can buy a little Aries bracelet.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that that is the case, or certainly from people that I know that have owned shops. But I think as well, a lot of it is to do with the fact that we do live in an age where we do so much more online now. And because of social media, because of the way that we can all put ourselves out there and advertise, pretty much anybody can run some form of business and they can run it from home. And
Yep.
so when you're in a community like the pagan community we have on YouTube, when we see that each other has businesses and shops and stuff like that, we want to support each other rather than giving money to strangers or much larger companies that don't really need our support. So if I see
Right.
that somebody is selling crystals or selling something that I know I could perhaps get easier if I just went out and bought it in a shop, but I want to support what they're trying to do with their lives. And I feel like YouTube, and I said like social media, gives us the opportunity to get to know one another from long distances. And so if you're, you know, saying this is my business, I've got an offer on at the moment, I'm much more likely to be like, okay, so she's in America, but I'd rather support her because I know that this is her passion. She's trying it.
Oh
Do you know what I mean?
Oh
So I
yeah.
think that that's probably a reason why as well, is because people can get these things online so much easier than they used to be able to, and they can be delivered straight to your door, and you know that you're supporting people like yourself when you
Well,
do
and
that.
I don't know if this is true for you in your area, but definitely over here, I have started seeing large corporations that really have nothing to do with, you know, New Age, the occult,
Mm-hmm.
witchcraft, paganism, really nothing to do in that sphere. But I've started to see elements of those items that you would expect to see in an occult-based shop at my local grocery stores, at my local
Yeah.
convenience stores. And it's become so mainstream now. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, you know, some of this stuff was just not available the way it is. And
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
ways, I think that is such a blessing that there's more availability, there's more visibility. And I think that's exactly what our community needs. But in other ways, I feel like stuff gets whitewashed. Crystals become plastic and sold for gemstone prices. And there's kind of a sense of fraudulence to it,
Yeah,
a little bit, and not genuine care whatsoever, you know?
I think that I totally agree. I do know exactly what you mean. But I think that that happens with everything. I think, in a sense, if something is popular, it gets produced by the mass and the quality goes down, and it's targeting people that it wouldn't originally target, and it becomes kind of trendy. But I think it happens with lots of things, and I think that eventually, if crystals, for example, is something that you are really passionate about, you may find them at some form of shop that sells all different kinds of bits and bobs, homeware, electrical things, all things in one, that type of shop, art supplies. You might find them there. But when you have low quality or something, like you said, like plastic or glass that's trying to pass itself off as a crystal, when you first compare that to the real thing, you realize that there's a big difference. And I think that the people that are really passionate about those things will always want the real thing. So in a way, I think it's good because it's advertising. It's getting this path out there. It's getting people intrigued. And some people are going to, buy crystals in the shop and think those are pretty, and they're just going to live on the windowsill and they'll never ever touch them again. But some people are going to be really intrigued by those, and that's going to lead them to these smaller businesses and down a different path. And so, yes, I think it's a shame that the quality of things goes down and they get mass produced. But at the same time, I think it can be a blessing because it makes the people that would really want to go that direction actually realize they can without going into something like a witchy shop.
Absolutely. I agree. So let's talk about you for a little bit, because you're the reason for the season, darling. I'm so excited to have you on the channel. So excited. So, okay. In one word, okay, if you were to describe your orthodoxy, orthopraxy, your beliefs, your practices in one word, I know it's like crazy to just limit everything down into one label or one word, but like, what would that be for you personally? That way, kind of explain what it's about so we can kind of, people who might not be familiar with you, who are watching, can kind of get a feel for where your perspective is coming from.
Do you mean like what title would I give myself?
Yeah, if you were to give yourself a title, or if you were to describe to someone, what you're about, where your perspective comes from. If you are eclectic or have a tradition, or
yeah,
if
I
you
know what you
consider
mean.
if you use colors, or there's no right or wrong answer.
I consider myself an eclectic witch, but if I had to pick a word, I would just say open, because that is very much what my kind of entire path is about and has always been about. It's not about narrowing down necessarily on the things that I dislike or that don't work for me. It's more about being open and finding the things that do work for me. And I found that on my path as well, things change so much over time. They constantly change, develop, and evolve. And so being open doesn't mean always kind of being set a certain way either for me. I'm open to change constantly. I like to call kind of, am I allowed to swear on your channel? Is that okay?
Yes,
okay.
We swear here.
I like to call bullshit on myself as often as possible with my beliefs, because I think that if I can't argue with myself and not be confused, or not have a set answer, at the end of really challenging myself about my beliefs, then maybe they're not as strong as I thought they were. So I really like to be able to challenge myself and grow and change at every opportunity when it comes to my witchcraft and every area of my life, really.
I think you answered that so beautifully, by the way.
Thank you.
That was a beautiful answer. And I really identify a lot with that as well, as someone who's eclectic. And, I thought about kind of what my answer, would be to that question. And it is such kind of a tricky, hard question, because I'm someone who I feel like, much like you, we don't like to necessarily put ourselves in limiting, constraining boxes.
Yeah, and I don't have anything against boxes. I don't have anything against people that want to put themselves in a box. And I don't have anything against people that use one specific title and, feel that they have all claim over that word. If that's what you want, like, cool, that's great. It makes no difference to me. I don't mind being in a box. It's just a lot of the time I don't stay there for very long. So it's a case of, if I do kind of try to explain myself being in certain categories or in a certain box, it just doesn't stay true for very long because I change. And that's what I like about my path. I know that some people don't like to change, they like to stay consistent, and that's fantastic for them. But the consistency in my path is the change. And so if I ever try and stop myself from changing, I feel unhappy. I feel like I'm holding myself back.
Right. No, and I agree with that as well. So what does Pantheons, Gods, the divine, is that a part for you of your path? And if so, how do you interpret that? And what does that look like to you?
Okay, so for me, the two main things, I refer to the universe most often. And then I also talk about source energy, which I consider to be the source of everything. So when I talk about the universe, I'm talking about our universe, whereas source energy, I consider to be the source of every universe ever, So those are the two things that I talk about the most often.
I really like how you separated that, by the way. I don't mean to just cut in, but I'd like that you differentiate it like that. That's really cool.
I think a lot of people talk about them being as if they're the same thing. And if that's how you see them as being the same thing, then they are, and that's cool. But to me, they're not. So that's how I think of them. So I see the universe as being part of source energy, if that makes sense. But I don't see the two words interchangeable. But when I talk about the universe, meaning the universe that I am in, I break it down into masculine and feminine kind of energies, because as a human being with a limited mindset, it's easier for me to do that. And when I say masculine and feminine, I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about the essence that is in all of us, the energy, the frequency of vibration that is in all of us. And it's both within all of us. And then for me, once I've broken that down into masculine and feminine, which I refer to as God and Goddess. When I say God and Goddess, I don't think of people sat somewhere on a cloud, or I don't think, excuse me, of people that have necessarily walked the earth before, although I'm sure that they are also representing the masculine and feminine within the universe. I see it more as just words to represent the sacred masculine and sacred feminine. And then when it comes to pantheons, I think that you can break that down even further. So you've got universe at the top, masculine and feminine, and then you break it down even further and you can give different names to the different aspects of the masculine and different names to the aspects of the divine feminine. So you might call it Freya, you might call it Lilith, you might call it Diana or Artemis. Those are just different people's ideas of characteristics or traits of the energy, and it's easier for humans to split everything up, I think.
Definitely. So I agree.
I see it all being part of the same thing. It's all from source energy. And in that sense, yes, I could say that I worship one thing, but then I break it down further and I worship multiple things. So there's no box.
Right. Well, And I agree, like my own interpretation of that is very similar. You know, okay, I love food. So I like to use examples with food. And so for me, when I think about divinity, very similar to what you're saying, I literally think of like a giant pizza, right? You have this big pizza, and this pizza is what I call the source, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, it is what it is. And it's just the all encompassing, it's the aether, it is the source, it is the large pizza. Okay.
Yeah.
But then there's like individual slices on this pizza, like pepperoni, sausage, Hawaiian, supreme, extra cheese. And these different slices are our gods that are part of this pizza. Like you were talking about Artemis or Hecate or the Morrigan or Zeus or Krishna. Yeah. And in that way, it is monotheistic in a way because they're all in that one, just like in Hinduism, it's all one and they're all manifestations of Brahma or manifestations of the universe, but they're also uniquely, individually separate as well. So it's also kind of, I would call, for me personally, not saying for you, but for me, I would also call it soft polytheism as well.
Okay. Yeah.
In a way, just like in a way it is kind of like very soft monotheism.
Yeah, I think
kind of like
it
on
can
that
be so many things. It depends on your perception of reality as to what it is. And I know that somebody else might look at what I believe and say, well, you're not this, you're this. And that's cool, because to them I will then be that. And that's great. But to me, I'm not. I use Buddha statues a lot of the time as God representation on my altar, because they are in fashion at the moment and they're everywhere and they're cheap. And so a lot of the time I will use Buddha as my God. I don't see Buddha as a god. I don't see Buddhism, I see it as a philosophy more so than a religion, just myself. But to me, Buddha can represent my God. Now, someone else may look at that and say, well, no, he can't, and to them, maybe not. But to me, he can. So I just kind of feel like, depending on everyone's perception, we're probably all exactly the same thing, really. We just go about it a little bit differently. And that I love, because to me, that is the collective consciousness. When I talk about the collective consciousness ever, like over on my channel or whenever I've talked about it before, I'm not just talking about the collective consciousness of pagans. I'm talking about the collective consciousness of every single person on the planet, and whether they're Muslim, whether they're Christian, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Hindu, whether they're Sikh, it doesn't make any difference, because that faith and that energy is all going somewhere. And so we all have the ability to tap into that. And I really love that. I love that when somebody prays to their Christian God in church, part of my energy is connected to that. And I think that that's lovely. I think that we're a lot closer than we feel we are.
Well, and in terms of community too, talking about other faiths, talking about our community, talking about collective consciousness, that leaves me kind of into a two-parter for you. Okay. So the first would be, what has your personal experiences been experiencing, seeking through other faiths as well? And I don't mean to just sit and assume, but I know that for most witches, and if this is not the case for you, feel free to say, but for most witches, I feel that we are very open to kind of experiencing maybe other organized religions, whether that be going to a church or going to a non-denominational event, or going to a Buddhist pagoda or a Hindu temple or a Muslim mosque or a Catholic mass. Have you also experiences that as well? And as a witch, what has your experience been like with that, kind of tying in with what you were just talking about that connected consciousness?
I was raised in a Christian family, and I really, really liked church when I was little. We didn't used to go to church all the time, but I did really enjoy going to church. I went to a Church of England school, And so we would also go to church with the school at certain holidays, like the Harvest Festival and at Easter and things like that. And I loved it. But I feel like for me, it was more the feeling of church as opposed to Christianity that I felt any form of connection with. And as soon as I was old enough to kind of make that distinction, I
Sure.
wanted to know more about Christianity. And I can remember hearing somebody point out the fact that God had made us in his own image, and that changed everything for me. That just put a huge like rod in everything for me, because I couldn't understand why there wasn't a god and a goddess, or why God was just a man. That threw me off completely. And this was 1998, so I was still very young, and that just threw me off. And I guess witchcraft, and I came to paganism first, just the general, and then sort of Wicca later on, and then moved away from Wicca, then came back to it, like, you know, all over the place. But I feel like for me, all religions, anywhere that I've ever been, whether it's been in a Catholic church or anyone that I've ever seen kind of practicing their religion, I get the same feeling from. I find it all exciting, and I find it all fun, and I find it all sacred.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of these people that loves to go and spend loads of time in graveyards. It's just not really my thing. But at the same time, whenever I do go to graveyards, whether it's to see someone or, you know, whatever the situation, whenever I do go, I always find it to be a really nice place, because everyone there is there because people love them, you know.
Right.
And I love that, even though it's got nothing to do with my religion. I still find that to be very sacred. And I think that for me, the collective consciousness is built up of everyone, as I said. And so everything is just as powerful for me in terms of energy. It's more so that the stories of their religion don't work for me personally. I'm not saying they're wrong, but they don't sound true to me. They don't feel true. And so that's why I'm not a different religion, if that makes sense. The things that I believe work for me, and so that's why I'm here.
Absolutely. And do you feel like those religions, like your being raised Christian or going to other religious organizational events or whatnot, do you feel like your practice has influenced? You were kind of talking about how you will use, you know, Buddha statues to kind of represent a symbol for the divine masculine. So do you, as also an eclectic person, do you feel like you kind of have that influence maybe also from other religions as well?
Yeah, definitely. I've taken a lot of things on from not only different religions, but different traditions within religions as well over time. At one point, I would only ever do ritual with my hair covered and barefoot. And that wasn't kind of taking directly from other religions for the same reasons, but it was kind of being inspired by what I saw when other people were worshipping or what other people were doing in their practice, and thinking, I want to do that and see how that makes me feel.
Yeah.
I've done that with some things and not felt anything, and just thought that was a bit of a waste of my time, actually. But then I've done it with some things, and it feels really special. I no longer cover my hair constantly for rituals, but I did at one point, and at that point it really served me a purpose. It might do again in the future. It doesn't right now, but it may do again in the future. And I love being barefoot anyway. I'm generally barefoot all the time. I've always got the grubbiest feet. I'm just one of those people. But I do very much enjoy doing any form of ritual or spell work barefoot. But again, I can do it with my shoes on, and it doesn't go against my beliefs if I do it with my shoes on. It's just a choice. But I definitely look at other, you know, and even religions that kind of fall under the umbrella term of paganism. I look at other religions there too and take different things from there. Yeah.
That's really cool. What was your
Thank you.
experience like with the veiling for ritual? You just did that just for ritual, or you veiled
No,
outside
I
of
didn't.
that
I
space as
didn't do it
well?
in kind of my daily life. It was just for ritual. I think I probably posted a few photos somewhere with it on, like, you know. But I wouldn't walk down the street with it on. Not because I kind of am ashamed to. I just didn't really feel a need to. But it felt a lot more. How can I say it? I think that the point of the veiling, for me, it started off being about covering my hair. And then I would cover my face sometimes too. And I would feel that if my hair and my face were covered, I felt less significant, but in a really good way. Because I think a lot of the time when you're doing ritual and you're trying to really feel that connection in the moment, I know everybody talks about it like it's so easy, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's really not. You know, I've been pagan for 20 years this year, and still, if I'm not feeling it sometimes, I don't feel like the elements are present with me when I cast a circle. Sometimes I don't feel like I have any form of deity or divinity with me or spirit guide. Sometimes I'm just like, oh, you know, because that's real life, that happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially if I'm somewhere where I want to do a ritual outside and people keep walking past with dogs and it keeps throwing me off. And, you know, in that kind of situation.
Oh no. We lost Mandi, guys. Maybe she got really passionate about what she was talking about and accidentally pressed a button or something. Or maybe she exited out of it. Are you there?
Yeah, sorry.
I was like, maybe she got really passionate about what she was talking about.
Yeah, and I just decided to go and dance in the street and tell everyone. But yeah,
with the dogs
can be,
by,
yeah, I can be in a situation where no matter how many rituals I've done, sometimes I'm just not feeling them. And so I think that you just have to be really, really honest with yourself. And for me, when I was veiling, when I was covering my face, I felt like that actual connection was less about me as a less about Mandi and the universe, and more about me being just a cell within the body of the universe. And it kind of strips away your identity, but not in a negative way. I know that sounds really, really negative, but in a really positive way.
Right.
It's more a way, for me at least, it's more a way of having a soul connection, that your experience here in this lifetime is irrelevant, but that part of you that goes wherever, whether you believe in reincarnation or heaven or whatever it is that you believe in, it's that part of you that makes a connection with the universe. And I think that when you are less worried about what you look like, you know, all of those things, when you strip all of that away, there's just a very basic layer left. And I really enjoyed that. And especially at the time that I was doing it, I felt a need to, for that period of time, get out of myself, if that made sense. Really kind of move away from what I thought of myself and the image or the idea of what I had of myself, and work on a much more organic level to see what was really there.
Yeah. The dog thing. So kind of funny. So my circle and I so the summer solstice that we just had, we decided to have a public ritual at one of our local state parks. And, you know, it's a public state park. So, and it's a heavily wooded park, right? So there's trails through the woods and little rivers, and it's a beautiful area. And so I actually brought a 10 by 10 tent that I would normally use at like festivals, and propped that up, and we decorated the tent out with tapestries. The inside of it had candles and pillows, and we had some other people from kind of, I guess you could call it the outer circle, on a witchy, intuitive, following your heart scavenger hunt to find the witch's circle tent for summer solstice in the woods. And it was
Oh, wow.
it was a really cool ritual. However, it was public. There were people passing by, and there was actually
Yeah.
a whole family having a field day in the river across from us on the other side. And we were doing a full-on ceremonial summer solstice ritual. We were belly dancing together. We were calling upon the goddess, calling upon the god, invoking the elements. I'm talking ceremony in the middle of the day with an audience of like a family reunion, essentially, on the other side of the river. And at first, I will say, I've been to a few public rituals, but not actually necessarily participated, more so witnessed them.
Yeah.
You know, been part of them on the sidelines versus actually part of the officiating of the ritual. And for this situation, at first, it was so weird. It was like, I felt like those butterfly jitters, like in school before you start, the play starts in theater class. Like I felt like that. But then like throughout, like it oddly didn't feel weird anymore. And it felt completely natural. And it almost felt like this whole family reunion going on the other side of the river was like, and that sort of crazy, chaotic energy, especially with it being, what was it, like 95 degrees with like crazy high humidity levels right by the river. Like it just felt so fitting for Litha and summer solstice that it wasn't even, after a while, it wasn't even a thing. And it was so hilarious too, because we were doing a initiation. We had an initiation thing going on with one of the girls, initiating into the circle. And she is actually like a dance sister of mine. So each of us had our own initiation with her, and my initiation with her was us dancing together. And it was crazy because we had a whole audience and they were like cheering us on, and it was a really cool, it was something that I was a little nervous about at first, but I was so glad it happened the way it did. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have wanted it any other way.
Yeah, I don't mind being with other people or people seeing me. That's never a problem. It's more a case of I get distracted really easily.
Yes.
So like if somebody was walking their dog and thought, oh, what's she doing? And so decided to come right over to me and stand in front of me and just look, I'd be fine with that. Admittedly, I think it was a bit weird, but I'd be fine with it because they would be putting their attention on the energy that I'm using and creating. Whereas when I can see other stuff going on, it's me that's the problem. It's never other people, and other people never bother me. It's always that I see them and think, oh, doggy, you know, and then it's really hard to kind of go from back to like, oh, you know.
So what have your experiences been like community-wise? You know, I have seen a lot of your content that you have produced on your channel, and I've seen that you've had kind of some witchy community experiences. So like share with us what that has been like, what those experiences kind of gave you, and like where you're at with kind of the public local witchy community.
So I have different kind of areas in my life for my different pagan friends. So like I'm in a coven with two girls. So they are kind of my coven friends, if that makes sense. And then I have my friends that I know that I see in my life that are kind of my pagan friends that we go to healing weekends together. We go like, you know, just different events as well as just hanging out in general. And we don't really do any form of magical working together. Some of them don't class themselves as witches, but they're very witchy. Just people that are interested in that type of thing. And then I have my best friend Aaron, who I mean, he grew up next door to me. His parents raised me and my parents raised him, kind of thing. We're just like brother and sister. And we kind of grew up. He doesn't consider himself a witch, I don't think, anymore, but we both grew up as pagans, and he considered himself an animist when we were younger, so he taught me all about that. And he was the first person actually who ever helped me cast a circle. I'd only ever read about it before, and he showed me how to do it. So there's that kind of aspect of my friendships as well. And then I have all of my YouTube friends on top of that, and some of them they all kind of interlink a little bit, but they're all from different areas, if that makes sense. And the people that I've met off YouTube, most of the time it's been really good experiences, and yeah, I've made some really good friends.
Have you met anyone online, whether it be the YouTube pagan platform or other kind of social media platforms in regards to the witchy vibes, whether it be Instagram or YouTube or Facebook, who you have originally met online but then met in person as well?
Yeah, loads of people, loads and loads of people. I suppose the one that people would know the most is, that's how I made friends with Laura Daligan, was just online originally, and then we met up in real life. We went to a fairy ball in Glastonbury, and then she was in my documentary, and she did a review of my book and stuff. So yeah, she's great, and she's one of these people that is so, or maybe I just find it funny, but when you see someone on TV or on YouTube or whoever that is so talented and that has so many different kind of things going on, I always expect that, like, I'm going to meet them and I'm going to be like, and like, you know, looking up at this giant, fantastic person. And then you see them in real life and they're always so tiny. Does that make sense? Like when you go to like a Madame Tussauds or something like that, like a wax museum, and you see like the size that celebrities actually are, and you're like, hell no, kind of thing, you know. And I can remember thinking that when I first met Laura, that I'd seen her videos online. She was really knowledgeable, she had such a big personality, and there was so much about her, and I really did expect I was just going to meet this woman and be like, oh, and she was so small, and I was just like, well, look at you, you know. and the same actually with my friend Olivia from the Egyptian channel on YouTube. She's another tiny one as well, and yeah, it's so bizarre because I feel like you build people up not just mentally, but you imagine that they're going to kind of be, or I do, I always assume people are going to be bigger because they're so fantastic that it kind of wouldn't all fit in them being so yeah. But I've met loads of people, yeah.
Yeah, I remember actually watching that documentary, and that was so well put together, that documentary. And it was really, it was delightful to watch.
Thank you. I really, really loved doing that. I really did. And it was one of those things, I mean, that year went really, really well for me. Like everybody else had a really crappy 2016 apparently, whereas like my life just sort of sorted itself out that year. Everything went really, really well. And in January 2016, this book publishing company approached me and said, would you like to write a book? And like, I think everybody at some point thinks like, oh, I could write a book, you know, because we're human, like we all do, don't we? But I'd never honestly sat down and thought about trying to write a book. It was never like you know, one of my passions as such. I love reading and I love writing, but I never thought I'm going to sit down and do this, and no matter how hard it is, I'm going to keep pushing till it gets done. But the opportunity was just kind of given, and then I got the opportunity of an album when somebody just asked me if I wanted to do one, and then the documentary was kind of the same. So I was like, okay. So yeah, that was a really good year.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2016 was a wild year, especially here in the States.
Yeah, it was. Everybody I spoke to was just like, 2016 sucks. Like everybody had such a bad time that year. And I was just like, yeah, it sucks.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, it's terrible over here too.
I think I got everybody's good luck kind of thing.
So, okay, moving into meeting people online, and, you know, you're over there, I'm over here, we're both witches, we have a lot in common as far as beliefs on divinity and kind of how we would describe our practices. However, I can't help but wonder, how our practices are also shaped by the land we live on, the country that we reside in. And I think it would be kind of fun to maybe talk about maybe some of those maybe cultural or regional differences between witches. I mean, think about the crazy differences between northern and southern hemisphere witches and pagans. You know, that's a big difference versus us. You know, I'm here in the States in Indiana in the Midwest. We probably have different, you know, I would imagine not the exact same climate, not the exact same animals or herbs that grow, and maybe even different witchy cultures. You know, just like Salem in the US is not going to be the same kind of witchy culture as here, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, my path is kind of, my path itself, I consider to be very European, if that makes sense. I work with deities that are from other areas, but my path has a very European feel to it to me. Like I'm very interested in Norse paganism, and a lot of the deities that I work with are Nordic. You know, Freya especially is one of the kind of main ones for me, and that's a big part of my path. So I feel like it's going into what you just said, the temperature for me as well. I feel like I feel my witchiest in the cold, whereas I think there's some people that feel they're witchiest in the heat. And I think that's probably another thing about, you know, having beliefs that are linked to kind of Scandinavian countries or Nordic countries that do get very cold, different things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like there's nothing witchier to me than the idea of like being in a cloak walking through a forest in the snow, whereas then other people might think of witchy as being like summer solstice and, you know, loads of bright colors and, you know, the sun shining down. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's not witchy, but to me I don't feel that vibration on the same level. It doesn't apply to me in the same way, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And even I'm sure the stores we shop at, like we were kind of talking a little bit about that before we went on live, just prices even from British pounds to American dollars, and the prices of things thereof and what things we might find. And I think an interesting one, I was actually watching, oh gosh, I can't remember her channel name. If I can remember who it was, I'll have to link her also in the description, but she's a Aussie practicing pagan witch, and she was talking about how, you know, they have such different animals, you know, in Australia than other parts of the world, and how that affects her practice working with those animal spirits, and also the kind of Aboriginal spirituality having a little bit of an influence into her practice because it is so there, you know what I mean? It's in that land.
Yeah, like if I saw a wallaby, that would knock my socks off. I wouldn't think, oh, you know, that's a message from the divine. I think, what the hell? Like, that would shock me a lot.
I would be like, is this a friend? Is this a friend? But from Europe to America, I feel like we probably have more animals in common than not.
Yes, I would imagine. I guess it depends where you are. I mean, here where I am in England, you know, it's quite common because I mean I live in a town, but it's a very small town, but I'm very kind of close to countryside, so it's very common to see like deers or foxes, deers, squirrel, you know, anything that you kind of. I don't think so.
Okay, because I know that possums are like America's only marsupial, but I didn't know if Europe had possums too.
I shall Google it. I'm not. It sounds adorable, but I'm hoping it is when I type it in.
They're like little trash princesses.
Oh,
you know, they look kind of like really big rats. They look like really big rats.
I've never ever seen one before, so I don't think we have them.
What? That's crazy.
I wish we did.
Do you guys have eagles? We
have like birds of prey. I'm not sure if we just have like stray eagle, like wild eagles. I'm not sure. I don't know anything, do I? I don't know. we have everything you typically see on pagan greetings cards. You know, like you always see hares and
magpies,
rabbits,
ravens,
foxes,
rabbits.
yeah, all of those things.
Wolves?
That's what we have.
Do you guys have wolves?
Oh,
okay,
wolves. I guess so. No,
a lot
we
of them
have to have
here.
wolves.
A lot of them here have actually been extinct.
I don't know. I'm
Like they've been
Googling it
hunted
now.
to the point of near extinction, which is really sad. In my area, I'm not saying that's the case in all of the states, but in my state, that is definitely the case. Which is really
okay.
sad.
It says they were once present in Great Britain, so I'm assuming they're not anymore.
Wolves, possums, or eagles?
Wolves.
Okay.
But then, like, my boyfriend is Finnish. Well, his mom's Finnish, his dad was English. So like when we go to Finland, there's different, like the last time we were there, we just saw a moose on the side of the road, just like there's big freaking moose. I was just like,
oh. Huge. Aren't they so huge? Like you see one and you're like, I did not realize that they were this big.
I know. And we were literally pulling in for coffee. Well, I didn't want coffee, but all of us in the car were stopping for coffee. So me and Alexi came back up this hill to where this moose was to try and take some photos. And it had kind of walked into the forest a little bit, but it really wasn't very far away. And there was a moment where it looked at me and I looked at him, and I wasn't sure if he was running towards us or away from us. Everything went a bit blurry and I thought, oh no, but he was running away. But yeah, that was pretty amazing. And so when, I suppose now being with Alexi, taking his kind of culture into consideration as well, because it does come into my life now. So that's very interesting as well. I'd actually just released, no, I hadn't just released, no, I'm lying. It wasn't that long since I'd released my album, which was very inspired by a lot of my Nordic beliefs. And then I went over to Finland for the first time, and we were at a cottage by a lake, which is his family's, they all stay in summer cottages over the summer. And I remember thinking like, oh, I wish I'd have waited just a tiny bit longer so that I could have written a track whilst I was here, because that's all I wanted to do when I was there, was like just either poetry or music or something, because it's just everything's so natural.
Yeah. Well, this has been an absolute blast, and I would totally love to have like a part 2 to this at some point. Live, because I feel like you and I mean, it seems like we both have the gift of gab because we have filled up our time for today. So
yeah, that can be our special power.
right. So thank you so much for allowing me to do kind of an interview on you, which we ended up talking about a lot of other things as well, but I appreciate you being open and willing to hop here on my channel and allow me to kind of get to know you more. And so do you have anything that you want to plug in? Yeah, do you have anything that you like want to plug in, like a blog, or I'm going to link your channel in the description, but if you have any other plugs that you would like to shamelessly promote, there's no harm in that.
No, not really. I'm kind of, at the moment, I'm going with this idea that if somebody's meant to find my stuff, they will. Do you know what I mean? At one point, everybody would be like, oh, promo. And I don't know, it just feels like I find stuff when I feel like I'm meant to. So other people will find me when they're meant to. Yeah.
No harm in that.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me there.
Yes, thank you for joining. And all the viewers, I'm sorry that I was not able to get back to a lot of the comments in here. There were a lot of really cool comments and there were some cool questions, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get to those in time. But I feel like there will be a part 2 to this.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to.
Okay. So for those of you who enjoyed this or who had those questions, feel free to come to that next one, and we will definitely make sure that number one, we have figured this out, this YouTube live thing and our time differences, and we've kind of gotten all those nails in there. And so we should be good to go and have a smoother sailing for a Kickstarter for the next live. And yeah, we'll definitely do it again. So bring those questions and comments over to that live, which I don't really necessarily have a time yet, but I'm sure I will, and she may, if you go to her channel, update you guys on when we decide that we're going to go live again. Chances are it'll probably be a Wednesday, but we'll talk about that off air. And I just want to thank everyone for joining, and you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.